I never thought I'd have to start my birthday by defending the only place I've ever called home. My name is Emily. I'm 32 years old, and today I want to tell you something deeply personal. You know when people assume they know your life just by looking at your house, your clothes, or the things you own? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. Only it wasn't just anyone. It was my own grandfather. And not just any grandfather, but a man who happens to be a billionaire, someone who thinks money defines worth. I had always admired him from a distance, even though we never shared much closeness. His world was one of private jets, luxury estates, and marble floors polished by people who never got thanked for their work. My world, on the other hand, was far simpler. A small wooden porch where I drank coffee every morning, walls filled with memories instead of paintings, and a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon on Sundays. It was humble, yes, but it was mine. So imagine this. It's my birthday. I've spent hours preparing a dinner with love, and when he finally walks into my home, the first thing he does is laugh. Not a soft laugh, not an awkward laugh, but a sharp, arrogant laugh that cut through the room like broken glass. He mocked my house, my choices, everything I had built with my own two hands. In that moment, part of me wanted to shrink, but another part of me, stronger, louder, rose up and said, "Enough." What happened next was a truth I had kept hidden for years. A truth that would not only shock him, but change everything about how he saw me. Before I take you deeper into this story, I need you to know one thing. This isn't just about a rich man mocking a modest home. It's about family, pride, and the hidden battles we fight in silence. My grandfather's wealth had always cast a shadow over the rest of the family. People tiptoed around him, laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny, and tolerated his arrogance because of the power his money gave him. But I wasn't about to let my birthday, of all days, turn into another scene where he got to belittle me. The truth is, I had been keeping a secret. For years, I let everyone, even my grandfather, believe I was just the simple one. The granddaughter with the small house, the average job, and the quiet life. What he didn't know was that behind closed doors, I was building something much bigger, something he could never laugh at again once the truth was revealed. This story is full of emotions, family drama, betrayal, but also redemption. It's about how one moment of mockery pushed me to finally step into the light and reveal everything I had worked for, everything I had become, and everything I had been hiding, not out of shame, but out of choice. And if you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever been judged by your appearance, your home, or your circumstances, then this story will speak directly to your heart. Because sometimes the people who think they know us best actually know us the least. But before I continue, I want to ask you something. If you enjoy stories like this, real and raw, filled with emotion and lessons we can all take into our own lives, make sure you subscribe to this channel. That way, you won't miss what comes next. When I think back to my childhood, my memories of my grandfather are blurry at best. He was always a figure that loomed larger than life, but never close enough to touch. My cousins and I used to joke that he belonged more to the headlines of business magazines than to our family gatherings. And in a way, that was true. His empire was built on real estate, skyscrapers with his name engraved in glass and steel, while my life was built on quieter foundations, family dinners, secondhand furniture, and the small joys of everyday living. Yet, even from a distance, I admired him. Maybe it was because I hoped that one day he would see me not as just another granddaughter, but as someone worthy of his respect. The contrast between our worlds couldn't have been clearer. Whenever I visited his mansion as a child, I remember being afraid to touch anything. The marble floors were so shiny they reflected my own face, and the chandeliers seemed like frozen fireworks. Everything was cold, immaculate, and intimidating. Back home, it was different. My mother's laughter filled every corner, and though our walls were chipped with age, they carried warmth and stories. To me, that house was priceless. But to him, it was just a reminder of how little we had compared to him. At least, that's what I always felt. As I grew older, I learned to keep my distance. I stopped hoping for approval and instead focused on building my own path. I went through struggles, paying bills late, working double shifts, skipping vacations, but I never complained. My house may not have had chandeliers, but it had heart. I was proud of it, even if I never said it out loud to him. Still, deep inside, there was a part of me that longed for one moment where he would walk through my door and smile, not because of what he saw, but because of who I was. That moment was supposed to come on my birthday. I had spent days preparing, not with money, but with effort and love. I cooked his favorite meal, roast beef with mashed potatoes, and baked a cake that carried the smell of vanilla and chocolate throughout the house. I cleaned every corner, polished every dish, and even placed fresh flowers in the living room. It wasn't grand, but it was beautiful to me. I wanted him to see that happiness wasn't measured in square footage or expensive furniture, but in the love poured into a place. When the doorbell rang that evening, my heart skipped. It wasn't just my grandfather, it was the whole family. My cousins came in, my aunts and uncles filled the room with chatter, and then, finally, he walked in. Tall, with his tailored suit and silver hair perfectly combed, he looked more like he had just stepped out of a boardroom than into a birthday dinner. For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, he would look around and smile. But what came instead was a sound I'll never forget. His laugh. It wasn't the laugh of joy, but of disdain. His eyes scanned the living room, the modest furniture, the small cracks in the walls, and then he shook his head. "This is where you live?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. My stomach dropped. My cousins looked at me with pity. Some even smirked, as if they had been waiting for this. He went on. "Emily, I thought you'd at least make something of yourself. This looks more like a student's dorm than a home." His words cut deeper than any knife. I felt heat rise to my face, a mix of shame and anger. I tried to laugh it off, to change the subject, but his comments didn't stop. He mocked the wooden porch, the second-hand sofa, even the handmade curtains my mother had sewn for me years ago. Each remark felt like a hammer breaking down the walls of the place I had worked so hard to make my sanctuary. The worst part wasn't the words themselves, but the way he said them, like my life was nothing more than a joke. For a moment, I wanted to disappear. I wanted to let the ground swallow me whole. But then, something shifted. I looked around the room and saw the people who mattered most to me. My mother, who had sacrificed everything to raise me. My friends, who showed up not because of what I had, but because of who I was. And suddenly, his laughter didn't sting the same way. Because what he failed to understand was that my home wasn't built for his approval. It was built for love, and love was something his billions could never buy. Still, I couldn't let it slide. Not this time. Not on my birthday. For years, I had stayed quiet, swallowing his remarks and his superiority. But at that moment, something inside me decided enough was enough. I took a deep breath, stood taller, and looked him straight in the eye. He thought he was mocking me, but little did he know I had a truth of my own, a truth that would turn his laughter into silence. What he didn't realize was that the house he mocked was only part of the story. Yes, it was modest. Yes, it was small. But what he didn't know was that behind the walls of that house, I had been building something far greater than what he could see. I had been keeping a secret, one that even my closest family members didn't fully know, and the time had come for it to finally be revealed. That night, as the air in the room grew heavier, I felt my heart pounding louder than his mocking words. I wasn't just Emily, the granddaughter with the humble home. I was so much more, and soon, everyone, including him, would know it. The silence after his mocking words seemed endless, but inside my mind, memories began rushing back like a flood. He thought my home defined me, that my life could be measured by square footage and designer furniture. What he didn't know was that for years, I had been living a double reality. By day, I was the Emily everyone thought they knew, the woman with the modest house, the simple job, and a quiet life. But when the lights went off and the world slept, I was someone else entirely, building something that even he, with all his billions, could never have imagined. It all started almost a decade earlier, when I was at my lowest. I had just turned 22, working 2 jobs just to cover rent, exhausted and hopeless. One night, sitting at the kitchen table with a broken laptop and a stack of overdue bills, I made a decision. I would not live my whole life just surviving. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I knew I had to create something of my own. And so, with nothing but determination, I started researching, reading, teaching myself skills that no one in my family had ever pursued before. While others saw me as the quiet granddaughter, I was secretly building the foundation of something huge. The nights were the hardest. I remember staring at my screen until dawn, my eyes burning, my fingers trembling over the keyboard. Sometimes I cried from exhaustion, but I never stopped. I learned how to build websites, how to manage online businesses, how to turn ideas into income. At first it was nothing, just a few dollars here and there. But little by little, it grew. My grandfather had built his empire with skyscrapers. I was building mine with code, ideas, and relentless persistence. And while he mocked my house, he didn't know that I owned more than one property, purchased quietly, under the radar, with the fruits of my hidden success. Of course, no one knew. I never flaunted it, never bragged, because I didn't want to be like him. I didn't want money to become my identity. I wore simple clothes, kept my home modest, and saved every penny I could. My closest friends would often ask, "Emily, why don't you move into a bigger place? Why don't you buy a new car?" I always smiled and gave the same answer, because happiness doesn't need to be proven. But the truth was, I was waiting for the right moment to reveal everything I had built, waiting for the day when it would truly matter. As I stood there in front of him that night, I thought of all the sacrifices I had made. The vacations I never took, the parties I skipped, the times I chose work over sleep. People thought I was boring, predictable, too simple. They didn't know that while they were chasing distractions, I was chasing a dream. Every moment of discipline, every hour of work had led me here. And though he laughed at my home, he had no idea that the woman standing before him was already more powerful than he could imagine. Not because of money alone, but because of what it represented: resilience, independence, and strength. I glanced at my mother across the room. She gave me a worried look, as if asking me not to start a fight. But this wasn't about fighting. It was about truth. My grandfather's arrogance had been tolerated for too long. He believed his money made him untouchable, that he could humiliate others without consequence. But what happens when the person you mock holds a secret that could turn your entire perception upside down? That was the moment I realized I had the power to change everything, not just for me, but for everyone watching. So I decided to start small. "Grandpa," I said, my voice steady though my heart raced, "do you really think this house defines me?" He smirked, leaning back as if my question was a joke. "Of course it does," he replied, loud enough for the room to hear. "Your house shows your worth. And this?" He gestured around. "This shows you have none." His words echoed like thunder, and for a second, the silence afterward felt unbearable. But then, instead of shrinking, I smiled, because he had just handed me the perfect opening. The truth is, I had been preparing for this moment. Not consciously, not intentionally, but every choice I made, every secret I kept, had led me here. He thought he was in control of the room, but he didn't know I was holding a story that could silence him in an instant. My life may have looked small from the outside, but inside, it was bigger than he could comprehend. And now, for the first time, I felt the strength to reveal it. But before I spoke, I let the room feel the tension. I wanted everyone, my cousins, my aunts, my mother, to really see me, not the quiet woman they thought they knew. I looked each of them in the eyes, one by one, and then turned back to him. "You've always judged me by what you can see," I said. "But what if I told you the truth is much bigger than what's in front of your eyes?" He frowned, clearly annoyed, but I could see a flicker of curiosity, and that flicker gave me the courage I needed. Because what came next would not just change how he saw me, it would change how everyone in that room saw me forever. Everyone waited for me to either apologize or retreat. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, reached for the blue folder hidden behind the flour canister, and returned to the living room. My hands trembled, but my voice came out steady. I placed the folder on the coffee table, beside the birthday cake and the mismatched plates. "You think this house defines me?" I said, meeting his eyes. "Tonight, I'll show you what actually does." I opened the folder, revealing deeds, bank statements, and a printed cap table with my name at the top. Everyone leaned closer, stunned into silence tonight. I pulled out the first deed. It was for a duplex in Long Beach bought in cash 3 years ago after months of renovating on weekends and nights. Then another deed, this one for a small fourplex in Phoenix, purchased under an LLC to protect tenants and privacy. I passed around photos, new roofs, fresh paint, safe porches with railings I installed myself. These aren't investments to impress anyone, I said. They're homes that pay for themselves, homes that treat people with dignity. My grandfather's eyebrows lifted, annoyed by curiosity. I could feel the room tilting, listening against their expectations. Next came the printouts that looked like gibberish to most of my family. Revenue dashboards, churn graphs, monthly recurring numbers. 2 years ago, I launched Hearthbridge, I said. It's a platform that connects small landlords with local contractors and tenants, prioritizing repairs, transparency, and fair payment schedules. I swallowed. We serve 12 cities now. The subscription covers emergency maintenance, and the model prevents predatory late fees. I pointed at the cap table. These are our investors, and here, I tapped my name, is majority ownership. My cousins leaned in closer, whispering. My mother pressed a hand to her chest, smiling through disbelief. My grandfather scoffed, but quieter than before. I slid another page across the table, this one stamped with a city seal. Last winter, I said, Hearthbridge won a pilot with the city of Detroit to modernize repair workflows for voucher housing. I showed a map with clusters of blue dots. Average time to complete emergency fixes dropped from weeks to 48 hours. Tenant complaints fell. Landlords saved money without cutting corners. My uncle whistled. My grandfather's jaw tightened. He hated the word vouchers. He called them inefficiencies. But the numbers on the page were undeniable, and the room felt different. He cleared his throat, preparing another insult, but I kept going. You asked why I live here, I said. Because building quietly kept me focused, safe, and honest. I didn't want this to become a performance. I gestured at the flowers, the cake, the cramped room that smelled like vanilla and hope. My goals aren't yachts or bragging rights. I want dependable housing and dignified maintenance to be normal, not newsworthy. My aunt stared at the dashboards, then at me. She had tears in her eyes. My cousins weren't smirking anymore. Even the youngest stopped scrolling and actually listened hard. I turned one more page. You might recognize this address, I said, sliding a photo of my childhood block in San Antonio. Last month, I bought the entire row through a community trust. We're capping rents, renovating responsibly, and giving tenants purchase options. Gasps erupted. But there's more. I lifted a letter with his company's logo. Your acquisitions team tried to flip these houses for short-term rentals. They lowballed lifelong residents. I outbid them and refused the flip. Then I emailed you, asking for a partnership to pilot ethical rehabs. You never answered. His eyes narrowed. The room pulsed harder. He finally spoke. Idealism is expensive, he said. The market doesn't care about your feelings. I nodded. True. That's why I brought numbers. I pointed to a chart comparing repair costs before and after standardized bids. Savings, 22%. Tenant retention, up 31%. Default risk, down. Then I showed letters from credit unions and union contractors agreeing to fixed-rate pipelines. This is sustainable, not charity, I said. Margins exist without squeezing people. My uncle cleared his throat again, but softly this time. My grandfather stared at the retention line, as if willing it to lie and failing right there. I breathed in, letting my grandmother's memory steady me. I named the trust after Nana Ruth, I said. She taught me to sew these curtains and to fix what you can before buying what you can't afford. The trust's charter lay beneath the letters. Scholarships for trades, grants for tool libraries, clinics for renters' rights. Hearthbridge funnels 1% of gross revenue here automatically, I continued. It's written into the bylaws. My mother sobbed once, happy and aching. My grandfather shifted, glancing at the curtains he'd mocked. For the first time, I saw uncertainty break through his certainty at last. I turned to him fully. I invited you tonight because I hoped you'd want in. Not the way you're used to, but with guardrails. I slid forward a term sheet offering a pilot across 3 of his mid-market properties with affordability covenants, transparent bids, and guaranteed timelines. Match our trust's contribution, I said, and we'll publish results publicly. If it fails, I'll take the loss. If it works, you'll have a blueprint and a legacy that isn't marble. The room held its breath. He stared at the term sheet as if it were a mirror showing a future he didn't recognize yet. He lifted his gaze, icy. "You think you can teach me business?" he asked. "You hid in a shoebox, playing noble." I exhaled slowly. "Then let's keep to business." I pulled the final document. "A ground lease assignment notarized last week. Piermont Lot C," I said softly. His pupils tightened. Everyone else looked confused. "Your luxury tower requires this loading bay for permits," I continued. "After the tax sale, the leasehold changed hands." I tapped my signature. "To me." The room went silent, humming with shock, as he realized dinner wasn't a plea. It was leverage I was finally willing to use. The silence in the room after my final reveal was heavy, almost unbearable. My grandfather's eyes locked on the lease assignment with a mix of disbelief and fury. He was a man used to control, used to bending markets and people alike with nothing but his name and money. But now, for the first time, he was staring at a deal that had slipped through his fingers. Because of me. His jaw tightened, and he leaned forward, his voice sharp and low. "You think one piece of paper makes you powerful?" he sneered. "You're playing dress-up in a world you don't understand." I felt the weight of his words, but I didn't flinch. "This isn't dress-up," I said calmly. "This is strategy. You taught me that, even if you didn't mean to. Every time you ignored me, every time you dismissed me, I learned. And now I know how to play the game, not by your rules, but by writing new ones." Gasps rippled through the room. My cousins looked back and forth between us like spectators at a match they never expected to see. My mother's hand shook slightly as she reached for her glass of water, her eyes never leaving me. His laugh this time wasn't sharp, but bitter. "Do you really think the world will bend for your pretty ideas? Investors, banks, unions, they'll eat you alive. And when they do, don't come crawling back. Because the truth is, Emily, you don't have what it takes to last in this world. You don't have my power." His voice grew louder with each word, as though trying to drown out the fact that I had bested him in front of everyone. But I refused to let his words define me. I had been underestimated before, and it was always fuel. "Maybe you're right," I said softly, but with steel beneath my tone. "Maybe I don't have your kind of power, but that's not the power the world respects anymore. People are tired of being squeezed. They want homes, not commodities. They want landlords who fix things, not ones who vanish until rent is due. That's what Hearthbridge is proving. You measure success in marble floors and towering skylines, but the future will measure it in stability, fairness, and impact. You can laugh, but you can't deny change when it's already here." The room buzzed. Even my cousins looked conflicted. His face darkened. He hated being challenged, especially by me. "Change?" he spat. "The only thing that changes is who holds the money. And believe me, Emily, it won't be you for long. You don't know the sharks waiting in the water. You'll drown before you even realize you're bleeding." He leaned back, crossing his arms as if he had already won. But his words didn't shake me the way they once might have, because I knew something he didn't. I wasn't swimming alone anymore. I had allies, contracts, and proof of concept that no sneer could erase. I took a step closer, my voice steady enough to slice through his threats. "I've already survived without your help. I've built this from nothing. Every late night, every setback, every tear, it made me stronger. You call them sharks, but I've been facing storms alone for years. The difference now is that I know my worth. I don't need your empire to stand. I already have one of my own." I saw something flicker in his eyes, just for a second. Was it fear? Or maybe respect he would never admit? Either way, it was the first crack in his armor. The tension in the room was suffocating. My aunt coughed to break the silence, but no one spoke. My cousins avoided my grandfather's glare, though I could see some of them silently rooting for me. My mother looked torn, pride and worry battling in her expression. My grandfather drummed his fingers against the arm of his chair, a habit I had seen countless times when deals weren't going his way. Finally, he leaned forward again, his voice dropping low. You think you've won tonight, but this isn't over. You've made yourself my competitor now. And in my world, competitors don't last. The words were meant to intimidate, to shrink me back into silence. But instead, they only fueled my resolve. Then maybe it's time someone challenged your world, I said firmly. Because if your empire can't withstand fairness, then maybe it shouldn't stand at all. My voice didn't waver, though my hands trembled slightly at my sides. The room seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't just a birthday dinner anymore. It was the beginning of something larger, a battle of ideals as much as blood. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to stand in the arena. He stood, his presence towering as if trying to remind everyone of the authority he carried. Be careful, Emily, he said, his tone sharp as a blade. I've built an empire by crushing those who got in my way. Don't make the mistake of thinking you're untouchable just because you had one clever move. You can lose everything faster than you built it. His warning hung heavy in the air, and I could see the worry deepening on my mother's face. But instead of backing down, I took a step closer, refusing to let him have the final word. I've already lost everything once, I replied. That's what you never understood. That's what makes me dangerous to your kind of power. Because I know what it's like to have nothing, and to build from it anyway. You can threaten me, try to tear me down, but you'll never erase what I've created, and you'll never silence the truth I've just spoken in front of this family. The words echoed louder than his threats, and for the first time, I saw him hesitate before turning away. His silence was not defeat, but it was the closest thing to it I had ever seen. As he walked toward the door, the room erupted into whispers. Some relatives rushed to my side, others to his, but all of them now knew one thing. The lines had been drawn. This wasn't just a family rift anymore. It was a declaration of war, quiet but undeniable. And as the door closed behind him, I knew this was only the beginning. The question wasn't whether I could withstand his wrath. It was how far I was willing to go to defend the world I was building, even if it meant going head-to-head with the most powerful man I knew. The days after that birthday dinner felt like living under a storm cloud. I knew my grandfather wouldn't stay silent for long. He was the kind of man who believed retaliation was necessary to protect his image. And sure enough, the first signs appeared quickly. Articles popped up in local papers questioning Hearthbridge's sustainability. Anonymous comments flooded online forums, doubting my ability to compete with established giants. It didn't take a genius to trace the whispers back to him. He wanted to plant doubt, to make me crumble before I even had the chance to prove myself. But I refused. At first, I admit I was scared. My chest felt tight whenever I opened my email, afraid of what I might find. I worried about my tenants, my contractors, my team members who had put their trust in me. I lay awake at night, wondering if I had gone too far, if maybe I had poked a bear I wasn't strong enough to fight. But then, messages started pouring in from unexpected places. A tenant thanking us for fixing her heater within 24 hours. A contractor telling me we saved him from bankruptcy by guaranteeing fair payment. Those voices drowned out the noise. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. When I answered, it was a city official from Chicago. "We've been following your pilot in Detroit," she said. "Would you consider bringing Hearthbridge here?" My hands shook as I held the phone, realizing that while my grandfather tried to smear me, the work itself was speaking louder than both of us. Opportunities were opening, not closing. And for the first time, I felt the scale tipping, not in his favor, but in mine. Of course, my grandfather wasn't going to accept that quietly. A week later, he invited several investors, developers, and city leaders to a gala at one of his luxury hotels. Word got to me that he planned to use the event to humiliate me, to dismiss my work as childish and naive in front of the people who mattered most in his world. My mother begged me not to go, afraid it would turn into a public spectacle. But I knew I had to. Running from him wasn't an option anymore. If he wanted to challenge me in public, then I would answer him in public. The ballroom was exactly what I expected. Chandeliers glittering like frozen fireworks, tables set with crystal and silver, and every guest dressed as if the night itself were a performance. When I walked in, whispers followed me. Some looked at me with pity, others with curiosity, a few with open skepticism. My grandfather stood near the stage, radiant in his confidence, shaking hands and smiling for cameras. When he saw me, his smile sharpened into something colder, more calculated. "Ah, Emily," he said loudly, drawing attention. "Welcome to the real world. I hope you brought more than blue folders this time." The crowd chuckled, some nervously, others in agreement. Heat rushed to my face, but I stood tall. He invited me onto the stage, pretending it was in goodwill. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "my granddaughter has a vision. But visions don't pay bills, and ideals don't survive markets. Tonight, let's give her a chance to explain why anyone should take her seriously." He gestured toward me with mocking grandeur, expecting me to stumble. Instead, I pulled out a small projector and connected it to the screen behind us. Gasps rose as charts, maps, and testimonials filled the wall. I spoke clearly, letting the numbers carry my words. "This is Hearthbridge. In the last year, we've completed over 10,000 repairs across 12 cities. Average completion time, 48 hours. Tenant satisfaction, 91%. Contractor retention, 87%. These aren't ideals, they're results." I clicked again, showing letters of intent from Chicago, Cleveland, and Dallas. Cities are asking for us because we solve problems faster and cheaper without exploiting people. This isn't a fantasy. It's a future already in motion. The murmurs shifted, skepticism giving way to interest. Investors leaned forward, taking notes. My grandfather's smile faltered. He tried to cut me off. "Numbers mean nothing without staying power," he said. But I turned to him and replied, "Then let me show you staying power." I revealed partnerships with credit unions, and nonprofits that had signed contracts guaranteeing multi-year commitments. Then I displayed testimonials from contractors who had doubled their stability, families who finally felt safe in their homes. "This isn't about me," I said. "It's about every person who deserves dignity where they live. And if you think that's weakness, then maybe the world is ready for a different kind of strength." The room erupted in applause. Not polite applause, but real, echoing, undeniable. My grandfather's face darkened as he realized the tide had turned. For once, the authority in the room wasn't his. It belonged to the truth of what I had built. People crowded around me afterward, asking questions, offering business cards, wanting to be part of what they had just witnessed. My mother wept quietly in the corner, pride written across her face. My cousins, once amused by my struggles, now avoided my grandfather's gaze. His empire no longer felt untouchable. Not after tonight. When he finally approached me, his voice was low, almost a growl. "You've made enemies you don't even see," he warned. "You think applause protects you? It doesn't. This game isn't over." For the first time, though, I didn't feel threatened. I felt free. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You're right. The game isn't over. But I'm not playing to win your approval anymore. I'm playing to change the rules." His eyes narrowed, but he had no words left. The silence between us said everything. He couldn't crush me anymore, because I no longer needed anything from him. As I left that ballroom, I realized something profound. Respect doesn't come from fear or from inherited wealth. It comes from impact, from resilience, from standing when the world expects you to fall. My grandfather might still be powerful, but that night proved something he couldn't deny. I was powerful too, in my own way. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need him to see it, because the world already had. When I walked out of that ballroom, I didn't just leave my grandfather behind. I left behind years of craving his approval. For most of my life, I believed his validation was a prize I had to earn, as if my worth depended on how he measured success. That belief had weighed me down like chains I didn't even notice. But that night, as the applause rang louder than his threats, I realized something that set me free. I never needed his respect to be whole. What I had built, the lives I had touched, the resilience I had forged through every setback, that was my proof, and it was enough. In the days that followed, I thought a lot about what it means to be underestimated. So many of us know that feeling, the sting of being laughed at, the shame of being dismissed, the exhaustion of carrying dreams that no one else believes in. It hurts deeply. But sometimes, being underestimated is also a gift, because it gives you the space to build quietly, to grow roots before anyone notices, to become stronger in the shadows until you're ready to step into the light. That's exactly what I did. And maybe, if you've ever felt like the world has written you off, that's exactly what you're doing too. I won't lie and say it was easy. It wasn't. There were nights I cried so hard I could barely breathe, mornings when I wanted to give up, moments when I questioned whether I was foolish for even trying. But every scar I carry is proof that I kept going. And if there's one lesson I hope you take from my story, it's this. You don't need permission to create the life you want. You don't need approval from someone who refuses to see your worth. You don't need to meet anyone else's definition of success. You only need to believe in yourself enough to keep building, even when no one is watching. My grandfather will probably never change. He'll keep building towers that scrape the sky, measuring his worth in glass and steel. And that's his choice. But me? I've chosen something different. I've chosen to measure my worth in stability, in fairness, in the smiles of families who feel safe in their homes. That's my empire. It may not be glamorous, it may not be headline-worthy, but it's real, and it's mine. And when I think of the little girl who once tiptoed across his marble floors, afraid to touch anything, I know she would be proud of the woman I've become. If you've been listening to my story, and something inside you stirred, if you've ever felt small in someone else's shadow, if you've ever been laughed at for your dreams, if you've ever been told you're not enough, then I want you to hear me now. You are more than enough. Your path may look different. Your victories may not shine in the same way as others, but they matter. Don't let anyone convince you that your worth depends on their approval. Build anyway, dream anyway, rise anyway. Because one day, like me, you'll stand tall and realize you were powerful all along. Thank you for being here with me, for listening, not just to the details of my story, but to the heart of it. And if this touched you, if you want to hear more stories that remind you you're not alone, please subscribe to this channel. Every story we share here is another reminder that resilience matters more than arrogance, that love matters more than money, and that dignity matters more than approval. I'd love to have you with me as we keep growing this community together.